Thank you to my patrons. Your generosity and commitment to my work is astonishing. I sincerely appreciate it. If you'd like to see your name in the credits and gain access to a plethora of other perks, bonuses, and extras, please consider becoming a patron today. Simply click the link in the description below. Thank you.
Basically, the argument is this. If you can imagine that there is a possibility of there being a God, then that means there has to exist the fact that there is a God. Yeah, I know. That's a tough one to wrap your mind around. I get it.
No, it's not difficult to wrap your head around. It's just spectacularly stupid. And it was stupid from the moment of its inception. This goes all the way back to Saint Anselm. And it was a stupid argument then, and it's still a stupid argument now. Most Christians are smart enough to avoid it. But here we have Allen still touting this argument as though it serves as a proof for the existence of God. Give me a f***ing break.
If you ever try to bullshit me like that again, I will rip off your arms.
Welcome to another episode of the most annoying religious people with your host, Magic Skeptic. Up for today is apologist Allen Parr, a Christian whose bullshit is so thick that I felt the need to include him for the second time in this series. Coming right up, Allen shares four absolutely terrible arguments for the existence of God, each one more stupid than the last. And I really mean that, by the way. The last argument in this list will render you speechless. It is so unbelievably dense. With all of that said and out of the way, and without further ado, let's dive right in. I give you the genius that is Allen Parr.
These next four proofs are what we'll call the traditional proofs that people have given over hundreds of years, centuries of years. And the first one we'll look at is what's called the cosmological argument. And this word comes from the idea of cosmos, or the universe. Now, I'm going to go ahead and read an excerpt from Wayne Grudem's systematic theology book, which describes it in this way. He says, every known thing in the universe has a cause. Therefore, it reasons the universe itself must also have a cause. And the cause of such a great universe can only be God.
There's a lot that could be said in response to this argument, but let me just name one thing. This is a very straightforward fallacy of composition. A fallacy of composition is committed when a person assumes that the whole must have the same characteristics and qualities as the parts of the whole. It simply does not follow that because everything in the universe, or every known thing in the universe, has a cause, that therefore the universe has a cause.
Every known thing in the universe has a cause. Therefore, it reasons the universe itself must also have a cause.
That simply doesn't follow. That is a non sequitur. There are so many examples to the contrary. Just because every brick in the wall is small, it doesn't therefore follow that the wall is small. Just because every ingredient that goes into a sponge cake lacks sponginess, it doesn't therefore follow that the cake will lack sponginess. Just because every component part of a plane is unable to fly, it doesn't follow that the plane will be unable to fly. And I can keep going here. If you look at the examples I just gave, they all demonstrate that the whole can in fact have completely different characteristics and properties when compared with the parts of the whole. So it is fallacious in the extreme to assume that the universe must have a cause simply because it is composed of things that have causes. It doesn't work that way. Now, some of you may point out some counterexamples. You might say, for example, but Magic Skeptic, if every brick in the wall is red, doesn't that mean that the resulting wall will be red? And sure, I agree, there are examples where the parts of the whole have the same characteristics and qualities as the whole itself. But all you would have demonstrated by raising such counterexamples is that inferring anything about the whole based on the parts of the whole is an inconsistent mechanism. So that changes the conversation into the following question. Is the universe an example where the parts of the whole tell us something about the whole itself? Or is the universe an example where the parts of the whole tell us nothing about the nature of the whole itself? And needless to say, that very question cannot be resolved with reference to masturbatory philosophical argumentation. Rather, questions like this are resolved with reference to empirical investigation, science. And need I state the obvious? We do not know how the universe came to be. The universe could in fact be eternal. The jury is out. There is no scientific consensus because there's no good evidence on the matter. In response to these claims, some of you will no doubt point out that we do know the origins of the universe. It's called the Big Bang. But the truth is, Big Bang cosmology hasn't settled the question of cosmic origins or the lack thereof. But don't take my word for it.
So the right answer is we don't know yet. And if you look at sort of the cosmological models that professional cosmologists are bandying about, some of them feature a beginning, a true first moment in time. But increasingly, many of them don't feature a beginning at all. They have an eternal universe that lasts infinitely far into the past and will stretch infinitely far into the future. We use the phrase, the Big Bang, to refer to that earliest moment of the history of the universe where we don't understand what is going on. It's a placeholder for our lack of understanding.
So as you can see, we don't know how the universe originated. It could well be the case that the past is infinite. The jury is out. And before anybody freaks out about that suggestion, you don't get to be a theist who believes in a God who has existed eternally, a causeless God, an eternally existing God, and then reprimand me for positing the existence of an eternally existing universe. That's called having it all your own way. If you're allowed to posit an eternally existing God that exists causelessly, why can't I posit the existence of an eternally existing universe that exists causelessly? The truth is, we don't know why there is something rather than nothing. It could be the case that the universe had a cause, and the nature of that cause remains to be seen. It could be the case that the universe was always here, that the universe itself is the necessary being. Whatever the case may be, the truth of the matter will be settled through scientific and empirical investigation. So you see, we cannot infer anything about the universe from the parts of the universe. We're stuck. We do not know. And that is the honest answer here. I'm sorry, Alan. I know you'd love to cite the fact that things around us have causes as evidence for the universe having a cause. But that is a big, fat fallacy, the fallacy of composition, and so long as your argument is fallacious, nobody should take it seriously. Let's proceed.
And so if we keep tracing the cause back and say, okay, well, what caused the plastic to be on this set of glasses? Okay, then what caused the plastic to be able to be created? Or what caused the resistors in here to be able to be created? And we keep tracing that cause and that cause back to that cause. And who caused that? What caused that? We're basically going to end up with a universe with nothing in it except stars, sun, moon, or whatnot. And then at this point, we have two options. Option one, God caused the universe that we have today. If you get to that conclusion that God is the source and the cause of everything, then you've already gotten to the place that you need to be. Now, the other possibility in terms of how we got our universe is this idea of the Big Bang Theory. But then you're stuck there because if you go with that route, then you have to come up with some sort of conclusion or explanation, if you will, on what caused the Big Bang. And then you have to come up with the explanation of who was the person who actually caused it, and then who was the person who created the two things or however many things that came together to make the Big Bang. And so if you keep tracing those things back, you'll ultimately get back to there has to be a cause for this, and that cause is God, who we call the uncaused cause.
How did we get to who?
What caused the Big Bang? And then you have to come up with the explanation of who was the person who actually caused it.
His mind is completely and utterly poisoned by theism. He is unable to think about causation in anything other than the agent causation that his worldview presupposes. This is a ridiculous way of thinking. Surely Alan is aware that things can happen without agents being involved. When an ice cube melts on the sidewalk, There's no agency involved there. It's just physical processes in a physical universe. The temperature that the sun is creating is too high for the ice to stay in ice form, so it melts and becomes water. There's no agent involved there. It's just physical processes. Why couldn't there just be a non-agent cause for the Big Bang? How does he justify the who here? And furthermore, how does he justify the idea that an infinite chain of causes is impossible? That seems to be the intuition that he's appealing to here. He seems to believe that there must be some kind of a first cause, that there has to be a first thing that got everything moving.
And so if you keep tracing those things back, you'll ultimately get back to there has to be a cause for this, and that cause is God, who we call the uncaused cause.
But that's not necessarily the case. You'd have to demonstrate that. How does he get there? He bases his conclusion on our inductive experience. When we look around the world, Allen will remind us that every time we see an effect, it's preceded by a cause. And so it's reasonable, or so claims Allen, to assume that therefore the universe, which is an effect, must be preceded by a cause. Seems so reasonable. It seems so rational. As I've already discussed in this video, this is little more than a fallacy of composition, but even if we ignore the compositional fallacy that's at play in this argument, it still doesn't work. What am I referring to? Well, if you look around you, dear listener, what you see are countless examples of material effects being preceded by material causes. So this inference doesn't work for Allen. Allen wants to use our experience of material causes and effects in order to infer something about an immaterial cause for the material effect that is the universe. This is clearly and obviously an improper inference. You can't use our inductive experience of material causes resulting in material effects in order to draw a conclusion about an immaterial cause resulting in a material effect, namely an immaterial mind, a spaceless, timeless, and immaterial being, divine or otherwise, being the cause for the material reality in which we find ourselves. So you see, dear listener, Allen is using and abusing inductive reasoning. Really and truly, if we were to take the inference of the evidence around us seriously, we would have to conclude that the universe has a material cause. I'm not saying that I believe that the cause of the universe is a material one. I'm not even claiming that the universe has a cause. I don't know why there is something rather than nothing. I don't think anybody knows the answer to that question. All I'm drawing attention to with this point is that if you want to go down this compositional fallacy road and you want to infer something about the universe based on the parts of the universe, what I'm suggesting to you is that inference, properly understood, points in the direction of a material cause, not the immaterial cause that Allen wants us to buy into. This is a very clear and obvious example of misusing inductive reasoning. Allen wants us to look at the general case but ignore the specifics. Furthermore, he's guilty of erecting a false dichotomy here. A false dichotomy is the practice of erecting two options as though they are exhaustive, when in fact there are other options available. He says that there are one of two options to explain the cause of the universe. One is God, and two is the Big Bang.
And then at this point, we have two options. Option one, God caused the universe that we have today. If you get to that conclusion that God is the source and the cause of everything, then you've already gotten to the place that you need to be. Now, the other possibility in terms of how we got our universe is this idea of the Big Bang theory.
This is completely untrue. It's also possible that the past is infinite, that the universe has simply always existed.
You know, we say the universe began 13.8 billion years ago. So that's a measurement. So because we can measure the speed that all the galaxies are flying away from us, essentially. And then you can run time backwards, if you like, to find out when they were all on top of each other. And so it's quite a simple measurement, and we've done that. So we say the universe began 13.8 billion years ago. But actually, all we know really was the universe was very hot and very dense at that time. And we have some theories that the universe was in existence before that, and perhaps some sort of circumstantial evidence. And that means that actually the universe could have always been there, eternal.
It could be the case that the universe is the thing that has always existed. But even if I took the dichotomy seriously, even if we just accepted for the sake of argument that Allen's dichotomy is correct and that there are only two options, God or the Big Bang, well then I would just choose the Big Bang, which leaves out your God. Now, Allen anticipates this and says, but then you'd have to demonstrate what caused the Big Bang.
But then you're stuck there, because if you go with that route, then you have to come up with some sort of conclusion or explanation, if you will, on what caused the Big Bang.
Or you know what, Allen? I could do what theists like you very rarely do and admit that I don't know what caused the Big Bang. And perhaps that is the most honest answer. I'm not saying that the past is infinite. I'm not saying that we've demonstrated that that's the case. I'm not saying that I can tell you what caused the Big Bang. I don't know what caused the Big Bang. Physicists don't know what caused the Big Bang. Cosmologists don't know what caused the Big Bang. We cannot get beyond the Planck time. So the only honest answer I can give is I don't know what caused the Big Bang. Do you know what caused the Big Bang, Allen? Because I'm pretty sure you're going to assert that God caused the Big Bang. And yet, we have no way of confirming that. We can't get beyond the Planck time. All we've got is your word. A big fat assertion that God is the best explanation.
Okay, so the fourth argument is called the teleological argument, and that comes from the word telos, which is from the idea of end or purpose. Now, this argument, basically, I'm going to read back from Wayne Grudem's Systematic Theology book, and he says it focuses on the evidence of harmony, order, and design in the universe, and argues that its design gives evidence of an intelligent purpose. So if I just take a whole bunch of parts from a store, if you will, Radio Shack, I get a whole bunch of parts, batteries, resistors, and I throw them all in this cup, and I just shake them up, right? I'm not going to be able to take all those parts out and, whoa, it pops a cell phone that I can call people all across the world, right? It doesn't work like that, right? So the idea is that as we look at our world, as we look at even childbirth, how how babies are born, the miracle of childbirth, and all sorts of other things, there has to be an intelligent designer that is behind all these things that are making it work.
Pre-Darwin, this analogy might have worked a treat, but unfortunately, that's no longer the case. Darwin put the final nail in the coffin of this argument. This analogy where he takes the component parts of a phone and puts them into a cup and shakes it up, and he says that this couldn't possibly produce an orderly design.
I'm not going to be able to take all those parts out and, whoa, it pops a cell phone that I can call people all across the world, right? It doesn't work like that, right?
I agree, but that's not what's going on with life.
As we look at even childbirth, how how babies are born, the miracle of childbirth.
Evolution is not random. The mutations are random, but natural selection is a very specific guide.
I strongly deny that evolution is random selection. Evolution is non-random selection.
Oh, so there's a purpose to it, is there?
No.
Could you explain what non-random means?
Yes, of course I could. It's my life's work.
It's a hard thing to say, but keep it brief.
There's random genetic variation and non-random survival and a non-random reproduction, which is why, as the generations go by, animals get better at doing what they do. That is quintessentially non-random. It does not mean there's a purpose in the sense of a human purpose, in the sense of a guiding principle which is thought up in advance.
That which is good enough at surviving will pass its genes into the next generation. Furthermore, he's guilty here of the fallacy of understating the evidence. So he wants us to believe that human beings, or life in general, is intelligently designed.
There has to be an intelligent designer that is behind all these things that are making it work.
And sure, I'll grant you that life is quite splendid, that there is incredible complexity in life. Look at the circulatory system, look at the human eye, and so forth. All of these things seem incredibly well functioning. And I totally get the intuition that these things might have been designed. But the devil is in the details. If you look closer at any of these things, you will find evidence of very poor design. Look at the fact that our genitalia is used for both excretion and sexual intercourse, a design which results in very unpleasant infections and diseases and so forth. That doesn't seem like very intelligent design. Look at the fact that 1 in 2 people will get cancer in the fullness of time. Cancer is something that pervades our genes. Yes, the human eye is very splendid, but it's also an eye that is subject to various maladies. Cataracts, for example, or even just something as simple as the fact that people require corrective lenses or color blindness. All of these issues are things that you're going to have to take on board when you talk about how intelligently designed the eye is. These are not examples of good design. So if you want to talk about the idea that the human body was designed by an agent, you're going to have to take credit for all of the design, not just the parts you'd like to focus on and accentuate. If this intelligent designer who designed the human body is to be judged by the quality of his design, I have a few complaints. I might be tempted to send the design back to the factory and ask for a refund or ask for a new model, because this design can be pretty damn shoddy depending on which parts you want to focus on. And bear in mind, I haven't even begun to discuss the problems that exist independent of our biology. Hurricanes, tsunamis, volcanoes, ice ages, droughts, and so on. And yet, preposterous though it might be, Allen will still maintain that this universe was not only very well designed, but in actuality, it was designed with us in mind. Contrary to what Allen was hoping to achieve with his cup analogy, it seems to me that if there is in fact a God, the ineptitude of this creation could only possibly be explained by a process not unlike Allen's analogy, which is to say that this God, whoever he, she, or it might be, created this universe by taking the cosmological ingredients, putting them in a cup, shaking it up, and chucking it into a vacuum. Suffice to say, Allen can only maintain that the universe is well designed, and more specifically, well designed for us, insofar as he's willing to omit key details about the brutality and the sheer indifference that exists in our reality. And in so doing, Allen is guilty of the fallacy of understating the evidence. And for all of those reasons, I'm going to move on.
Now, the fifth argument is what's called the moral argument. And this is the idea that basically inherent in every single person who has ever existed is this idea of right and wrong. Now, do some people go against their own conscience and do wrong? Of course, we all do. But inherently, let's be honest, we all have a common sense of certain things being right and certain things being wrong. We understand that it is wrong to molest a child. We understand that it is wrong to take the innocent life of somebody. We understand all these things are wrong. Where did that come from? Where did this idea of this is right and no, this is wrong come from? It had to have come from God, because if it didn't come from God, then that means that every single person on earth would have their own separate standard of morality versus there being a general common morality that is shared amongst all human beings, and that could have only come from a morally perfect being, i.e. God.
Have you looked at the news, Alan? Have you looked around the world and seen how different cultures and different societies treat people versus how we might treat people here in the UK, or how people are treated in the US, or how people are treated in Saudi Arabia and so forth? Just look at the question of women's rights and look at how radically different societies diverge on that question. In Saudi Arabia, as a consequence of guardianship laws, women cannot leave the house unless there is a male present. That stands in stark contrast to how women are treated here where I live in the UK, where women are free to go wherever they like, by themselves or with whoever they like. The exact opposite standard. So no, it's not obvious to me that we all share a single morality. That's not the case at all. History makes this even more obvious. At a certain point in the past, Alan, people who shared your skin color were enslaved. And the Bible itself was used to justify that slavery, so-called biblical morality. Are you kidding me? There is no obvious condemnation of slavery in the Bible. The Bible is pro-slavery. Suffice to say, there's mountains of evidence which serves to demonstrate that morality is pretty fucking far from universal. That said, it is fair to say that there are certain minimal norms and ethical commitments that do appear to be universal. Prohibitions on things like murder, rape, and theft for law-abiding members of one's in-group appear to be universal. And so the question becomes, how do we explain these universal ethical norms? Needless to say, there are naturalistic explanations on offer. If human beings thought that murder, rape, and theft were permissible, we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't be standing around having this conversation. You wouldn't be watching this video. It's that simple. That said, and by way of analogy, it's not necessary for me to offer a naturalistic explanation when somebody claims that their house is haunted. When they point out that there are strange noises coming from the attic, it's not necessary for me to offer a naturalistic accounting for those noises in order to resist their claim that the noises are best explained by ghosts. Their claim that ghosts are involved stands and falls on its own merits, independent of my ability or lack thereof to come up with a naturalistic explanation. For to suggest otherwise would be to engage in an argument from ignorance fallacy, i.e. the preposterous notion that one's belief is true until someone proves it wrong. In the same manner, it's not necessary for me in this video to offer a naturalistic foundation for morality. Allen's accounting for the foundations of morality stands and falls on its own merits, independent of my ability to offer a naturalistic accounting. Speaking of which, Allen's explanation, on the other hand, is a divine one. The problem is, Allen hasn't provided a shred of evidence for these claims. He is asserting that God has given us a universal moral code.
Where did this idea of this is right and no, this is wrong come from? It had to have come from God.
Again, please notice he hasn't provided a shred of evidence. So with the greatest of respect, dear listener, I'm not going to spend any more time on this. At least when Allen articulated the other arguments that I've covered in this video, he made some kind of an attempt to provide some philosophical or evidential justification. But on this particular point, he has just engaged in bald-assed assertions. And for that reason, he doesn't deserve any more of my time on this particular point. With all that said, I'm going to proceed.
Okay, and the sixth and final proof is a difficult one to wrap your mind around, and it's the ontological argument. And the idea here is, if you can imagine some great maximal being, if you will, right? If you can imagine that being in your mind that can do all these things, that's all powerful, all knowing, that is all sovereign and in control of all things. But if that being only exists in your mind and you're only able to just imagine him, but he doesn't really exist, then that means by default, he can't be the maximum being, i.e. God. There has to be another being out there that is greater than the one that you've actually imagined, because now this being not only exists in your consciousness, but also exists actually in reality as well. And so therefore, there has to be a greater God. Basically the argument is this: if you can imagine that there is a possibility of there being a God, then that means there has to exist the fact that there is a God. Yeah, I know. That's a tough one to wrap your mind around. I get it.
No, it's not difficult to wrap your head around. It's just spectacularly stupid. And it was stupid from the moment of its inception. This goes all the way back to Saint Anselm. And it was a stupid argument then, and it's still a stupid argument now. Most Christians are smart enough to avoid it. But here we have Allen still touting this argument as though it serves as a proof for the existence of God. Give me a break. I'm not going to spend long on this argument, guys, because I've made a video where I detail this argument in depth, which I'll include in the description below. All I'll say for now is this: if you could imagine the most perfect lost island,
if you can imagine some great maximal being, if you will, right,
then this island must exist in reality. For if it were only a thought in your head, there would be an island that is greater.
But if that being only exists in your mind and you're only able to just imagine him, but he doesn't really exist, then that means by default, he can't be the maximum being, i.e. God. There has to be another being out there that is greater than the one that you've actually imagined.
So the mere fact that you can think of this most perfect lost island means that this island must exist in reality.
If you can imagine that there is a possibility of there being a God, then that means there has to exist the fact that there is a God.
Ergo, the most perfect lost island exists.
And so therefore, there has to be a greater God.
You see, guys, this kind of reasoning can be used to demonstrate the existence of a whole host of perfect or so-called perfect entities. It simply does not work. The fact that you can think of something as perfect doesn't mean that that thing exists in reality. And to suggest otherwise just makes you a moron. It's not difficult to wrap your head around this argument. What's difficult to wrap your head around is the stupidity of a person who would take this argument seriously.